Hi there. Do you know if singer and songwriter Bob Welch is on board yet?
He's not, because he died in 2012.
Can you give me a moment?
Can't believe Bob Welch is really gone.
Hey, we just heard about Bob Welch.
Yeah. Who the is Bob Welch?
Fleetwood Mac probably has one of the more complex histories in music. Naturally, I'm pretty sure most of us are very familiar with this specific era of the band, and this specific era usually ranges from 1975 to 1987, but before that you have the more blues rock period from the late 60s to early 70s, and then you have everything post 1987 where most fans say it has probably some of the band's worst material.
Except you stay.
However, there is one era of the band that is vastly overshadowed, and that's this era.
The Air Force won't let on. Might be a hole down in the ocean.
From 1971 to 1975, the band released 5 studio albums, and this era is often called the Bob Welch era, mainly because it's named after the guy who was probably the main constant and one of the big driving force of this specific period. As I stated before, this era of the band is vastly ignored. Most don't even know this era even happened. But in this video, I want to go ahead and shed some light on these albums and tell you that these albums are very underrated and are worth your time. So if you're a fan of the Bob Welch era of Fleetwood Mac, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and let's dive in. Bryer's Music Showcase is brought to you by the people over at Patreon. Pledge today and get access to exclusive perks. Link in the description. Now before we actually talk about these albums, we do need to set the stage, if you will. I'm pretty sure most people are aware that Fleetwood Mac actually started as a blues rock act, and this was fronted by Peter Green. Hence, this era is often called Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. And Peter would stay in the band for 3 albums, and if you want my quick thoughts on those 3, debut, okay. Mr. Wonderful, dog shit. Then Play On, fantastic. Then Play On also introduced Danny Kirwan into the band, who would be the second guitar player. But after this album, things slowly kind of fell apart for Peter as he was going through drug addiction and his mental health was deteriorating. And so after this album right here, he decided it was best for him to leave. And so at this point, the band lineup consisted of Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, Danny Kirwan, and Jeremy Spencer. This specific lineup would release Killing House in 1970, and it's a pretty mediocre album if I'm going to be honest, mainly due to Jeremy Spencer just really not pulling his weight in the songwriting department in my opinion. But speaking of Jeremy Spencer, an interesting event happened. So this was when they were touring, and Jeremy was kind of depressed about something, and so while they were in the hotel room, Jeremy decided to kind of go out, maybe go to a store and buy a magazine. And the rest of the band were kind of waiting for him, but he surprisingly never came back. And the reason why is because Jeremy joined a cult. The cult that Jeremy ended up joining was called Children of God, but was also known as the Family International. And I cannot say what this cult's all about because if I do, this channel could get demonetized. Honestly, I'm not even that sad that Jeremy left because, yeah, he was definitely the weak link of the band at this point. With Jeremy out of the band, they definitely needed another guitar player, and surprisingly, they didn't have to look too hard because their friend slash part-time secretary, Judy Wong, actually recommended someone because she went to the same high school as this person. And the person she kind of recommended was Bob Welch.
Is Bob Welch?
Now, Bob Welch was born in Hollywood, California on August 31st, 1945. His father was actually a producer slash screenwriter, and his mom was a singer slash actress. So music was kind of always in his background. In his teen years, he picked up guitar and he took a lot of inspiration from jazz, blues and rock, stuff that's going to play a role later down the road. He joined a few bands, but of course none of them really went anywhere, and at some point he wound up in Paris where he was just struggling to get by, but he did get the call to audition for Fleetwood Mac. He went and he got the role.
They were kind of saying, well, what are we really going to do, and have we been cursed, and is this the continual curse of the absconding guitar players? And is this new guy, I mean, I knew I was being scrutinized not so much for my musical talents, but for my psychological soundness, shall we say.
He was totally different background, R&B, sort of jazzy. He brought his personality. I mean, he was a member of Fleetwood Mac before we'd even played a note.
And in 1971, this brand new lineup would release the album Future Games. And another thing noting about this album is that not only you have Bob Welch in the band, you have Christine McVie on piano and as a second vocalist, or third vocalist, if you will, because Danny also does some singing too. But to me, this is a really nice way to kind of introduce this new era of the band. I mean, I should also preference one thing. Of course, these albums didn't sell that well. Now, I should have mentioned this earlier, but one of the main reasons this era is often ignored comes down to the fact that these came out during when the band were at their least commercial successful. They weren't that big sellers, and none of the songs were like massive hits. They would have minor hits that we'll talk about as we go along, but nothing like a big smash. But if you do check out these albums, you will be surprised at just how sophisticated and just well put together these songs were. Because Bob, like I mentioned, he came from a more jazzy R&B background, which was different from the more bluesy stuff that Fleetwood Mac were used to. And it's on full display here. Women of 1,000 Years just has a really cool vibe, just setting the tone. And then, of course, Christine comes in with her songs, Morning Rain, which is just a lovely first song for her. I mean, I'm a big Christine McVie fan, so this is definitely when Fleetwood Mac really started to get good for me. What a Shame is nice. And then you have The Longest Song, which is the title song, which is kind of the closest the band ever got to doing progressive rock. But it's just this very dreamy, very melodic sort of tone, which is really nice. And Bob has a very peculiar voice. Like, he's not like a belter, but it just blends really well into the sound. Sands of Time, Sometimes, Lay It All Down, and then you have Show Me a Smile. Again, just a very strong way to introduce this new lineup of the band, even though, again, it wasn't that big of a seller. Again, if you have not heard that album, it's definitely worth your time if you want something a little bit different. And I guess I like the album so much, I ended up getting the original long box for this. I just bought it on Amazon, I think, and it just so happened to come in this. So that's kind of interesting. It's my only long box I have, but that's pretty cool. And then in 1972, the band kept going with the same lineup, and we have Bare Trees. And I think it's a little bit stronger than Future Games in my opinion. But this is when Danny was slowly starting to take a more backseat approach, because he was going through a little bit of a depression at this point, and this would be the last album he would appear on. But still, I think it's a pretty solid way for him to go out with. You have Children of Mine, and then you have another great Bob Welch song with The Ghost. Very eerie sounding, but I love the drumming on that one, and just this keyboard that they have really gives a more haunting feel, which makes sense because of The Ghost. Homeward Bound, a good Christine McVie, kind of more a pop song. Sunny Side of Heaven, sorry. Bare Trees is really nice. But then you have probably the biggest hit from the Bob Welch era, and that is Sentimental Lady. And it wasn't a big hit here, but funny enough, later in the decade, when Bob Welch was already out of the band, he would actually re-record this song, and he would record it for his solo album, which I do have somewhere right here. Let me see if it's close by. Here it is. This album right here. This is French Kiss, and this would end up being a much bigger hit. So interesting how that played out. But again, Sentimental Lady, great song. The acoustic guitar is really nice, and I love how the pre-chorus builds to the chorus, and you have Christine McVie doing some backing vocals. If I were to recommend one song from the Bob Welch era, I think Sentimental Lady would be a good one. And then from that point on, the album kind of loses steam a little bit towards the second half. You know, Danny's Chance, it's okay. Spare Me a Little of Your Love's really good. Dust is fine, and then you have this weird poem read by an old woman called Thoughts on a Gray Day. But still, it's still worth your time if you want to check that one out. And then Danny left, like I mentioned, and so the band brought in 2 more members. So for 1973's Penguin, we now have Bob Weston, I think, on guitar. And then you got another vocalist named Dave Walker. And I will say, not a good fit, because, you know, Bob Welch, Christine McVie, they have these very melodic, very, I don't know what you call their voices, like very mellow sort of tones to them. But then you have, on the songs, I'm a Roadrunner and The Derelict, you have Dave just hollering, which, I don't know, just not really a good fit. So it's those 2 songs that really bring down the album a little bit. But still, you know, you still have some great songs. I think the first 3 songs are sung by Christine. You know, Remember Me, Bright Fire, and Dissatisfied. Yeah, great songs there. And of course, Bob still has some nice moments with Revelation, and then Did You Ever Love Me? Night Watch and Con the Rain are pretty solid too. So it's still a solid album, but I'd say it's probably my least favorite of this era of the band. Oddly enough, also co-produced by Martin Birch, who would have a big career with a lot of hard rock and metal bands. Kind of weird seeing him in Fleetwood Mac, but still, cool little tidbit. And I think the band agreed that Dave Walker was not that good of a fit, so he was out of the band, and then he briefly sang for Black Sabbath for a period. Weird history there, but moving on. In the same year of 1973, we have the next album, and that is Mystery to Me, with probably the most bizarre album covers the band ever put out. Like, I don't even know what the heck this is supposed to represent. It really is a mystery. And of course, on the back, you have this old man and a penguin in the back. And I must say, despite the album cover, this is probably my favorite of the Bob Welch era. Because to me, the songwriting was probably at their best here. You know, songs like Emerald Eyes, great Bob song, and Believe Me is nice, just Crazy Love, Hypnotized. Like, the drumming on that is just so hypnotic. And again, the vibe that Bob can paint is just really cool. Forever, Keep On Going, The City, The Way I Feel. And this album also has probably one of the most underrated Fleetwood Mac song, and to me is one of Christine's best, and that's the closing song, Why. That's a song that you have to experience. I just love the orchestration, how it builds towards the end, and again, one of my favorite Christine McVie vocal performances. So yeah, Mystery to Me, if you can get past the album cover, you will definitely probably have a good time, because I think it's very well done. But that's when the cracks were starting to show yet again, because during the tour, you know, things were not good relationship-wise. Bob Weston had a little fun time with Mick Fleetwood's wife, so he was fired, and the lineup changes, and again, the constant touring was starting to take its toll on the band, and they decided to take a break, but their manager at the time didn't want to lose any money, so he decided to form a fake Fleetwood Mac behind the band's back, and then this resulted in a lawsuit, and that was adding more stress. So despite all that, you know, you still have Mick, Bob, Christine, and John, and they released 1974's Heroes Are Hard to Find, which probably has the worst album cover out of the ones we've shown today. Just what the heck was Mick thinking with this? But again, if you can get past it, it's still a very solid album. Not as strong as Mystery to Me, but there's still some great strong moments, like the title track, Coming Home, Bermuda Triangle. Bermuda Triangle is another good highlight, as it starts out kind of mellow, but then once it gets going, you just got this really infectious groove. Love that one. Come a Little Closer, Silver Heels, and another one of my favorite Christine songs would Prove Your Love. Born Enchanter, and then you have Safe Harbor, which is mostly instrumental. There's really not many, there's like a couple lines in there, but just the tone of it, I don't know, it just kind of gives you a very melancholic feel, in which, knowing how Bob's story ended, it's kind of, I don't know, I forgot the exact words, but you just kind of reflect on that one. But besides that, still a very solid album, and I think it's still worth your time, but maybe not as strong as some of the others ones. One more thing I should mention with this album is that this was pretty much recorded in Los Angeles, and when Bob left, the band was basically stuck there for a while, and they were able to get a replacement for Bob. They had a guitar player, but that guitar player didn't want to join unless they brought in his girlfriend as well, and that would result in probably their most successful period, and the rest is history. As for Bob though, as I said before, he would continue a solo career, and it got some success, but throughout the 80s into the 90s it kind of slowed down, and then there was some bad blood in the early 90s when he sued the band for not getting royalties for some of the songs he wrote, but I think that got settled out of court. But the bad blood came back again in 1998 when the Fleetwood Mac was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And the people included were, of course, the Buckingham Nicks lineup. I mean, that goes without saying. But they also included Peter Green, Danny Kerwin, and Jeremy Spencer, but no mention of Bob Welch. I get that it wasn't the band's most successful period, but Bob was a big constant throughout that whole early 70s run, so it is interesting why they purposely excluded him. I mean, come on, the Hall excluded Bob Welch, but they decided to bring in Jeremy Spencer, who joined a cult that was notorious for abusing children in. Now, Bob was bitter about that for a bit, but he eventually forgave the band as he came to terms that it wasn't their fault. Of course, it was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame committee who was responsible for this, but it's still a dang shame he was not inducted at that point, and I don't even think he still is. But sadly, things would get even sadder for Bob, as in 2012 he underwent spinal surgery, and the surgery unfortunately didn't go well, and he was told by doctors that it was not gonna get better again. After getting the news, he grew increasingly depressed, and then 3 months later, on June 7th, 2012, his wife would find him in his Nashville home. He had taken his own life. He was just 66 years old. Remember earlier I brought up Safe Harbor, and again, it's mostly instrumental. There's not many lines to it, but the few lines that are included and the tone of the song, again, you can't help but feel that even back then, Bob kind of suffered from depression. And, you know, it's sad that this is the way he went out.
We saw Bob almost every time we went to Nashville, which was many, many, many times since 1975, obviously. I knew Bob, and I had a lot of fun with Bob. I went and sang, on, a couple different festivals with him, and he was very funny, and I really very much respected his amazing musical talent. He was one of those jazz guitarists that could just play any chord in the world. And he was funny, and he was smart, and I enjoyed him.
A lot of his former bandmates would pay tribute, and Mick Fleetwood would come out and say he was a very, very profoundly intelligent human being and always in good humor. His legacy would be his songwriting abilities that he brought to Fleetwood Mac, which will survive all of us. And despite all that, I still feel like it's a shame that, again, a lot of these albums are still vastly ignored from most music people out there. Again, people usually rave about Buckingham Nicks, which, hey, I'm not going to say anything because that's my favorite period, of course. And of course, people also talk a lot of praise of the early blues rock period with Peter Green. But again, not too many people will speak up about this. And I just think it's time to give these albums some more recognition, and that's the whole purpose of this video. It's a very similar story when I did my Tony Martin video quite a few years ago for Black Sabbath. And the thing I said in that video can also apply here. Yeah, it's not their most commercially successful period, but there was always that person that was a constant that gave the band some consistency throughout. And that was kind of Bob Welch's role. You know, early on, Danny maybe had more say than Bob at this point, but then once Danny left, it was really up to Bob and, of course, all the other members to kind of come together and just try to find some normalcy or consistency that is kind of felt throughout all these 5 albums. And like I said, if you have not checked out these 5 albums, do yourself a favor, give them a try, because you might be surprised. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and if you're a fan of the Bob Welch era Fleetwood Mac, feel free to share your thoughts and some of your favorite songs. I look forward to reading them. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and goodbye for now.